Generalized anxiety disorder is not a personality flaw, and it's not about worrying too much. It is a real treatable illness. And here's the part that no one tells you. The worry is not the problem. The worry is the solution your mind invented. It is what you do so you don't have to feel what is underneath. That is how you stop managing your anxiety. It feels productive. It feels like responsibility. Like you're the only one in the room that is actually paying attention. Like if you can just think through one more time, you'll finally be safe. And that's your defense. It doesn't feel like a symptom. It feels like being a responsible adult, a responsible person. Meanwhile, we say it about everything. I have so much anxiety about this email. I'm just an anxious person. It's become a personality trait. So here's what nobody spells out for you. What generalized anxiety disorder actually is versus what everybody else thinks it is. Make sure that you stay until the end. I'll give you real tools that you can use today. And remember, there is hope. If you're new to my channel, hi, I'm Dr. Nikki. I'm a registered psychotherapist with 20 years of experience treating individuals who struggle with complex mental illness. I'm here to share my knowledge, answer your questions, and help you sharpen your critical thinking skills so that you can make wiser decisions and take back control of your life. So here's where this is going. By the end, you'll be able to tell the difference between ordinary worry and actual generalized anxiety. You'll understand the biology underneath it, the alarm system, the fight or flight switch, the chemistry of your brakes, and the one brain structure almost nobody explains. You'll see the part that almost no one talks about, which is the personality structure that can sit right underneath, and what the worry is actually doing for you. You'll know how it actually is treated, and I'm going to be honest with you about what the evidence does and does not say. Hold this in your mind. Generalized anxiety disorder is not a personality flaw. And it's not about you worrying too much. It's a real treatable illness. And here's the part that nobody tells you. The worry is not the problem. The worry is your path to the solution. The avoidance of the worry is what keeps you stuck. It's what you do so that you don't have to feel what's underneath. You turn the alarm down with the right care. So this means therapy, medication, or both. And then you're able to do the deeper work once you're balanced. You go looking for what the worry has been protecting you from, what the worry is a defense against. So this is how you stop managing your anxiety and start living without needing it. Remember to hold on to that because everything I'm about to tell you leads straight back to this. Let's start off with the distinction that everything else hangs on to. And this is not the one that you think. The DSM makes a distinction that most people have never heard. Fear is the emotional response to a real perceived imminent threat. Anxiety is the anticipation of future threats. So hang on to that. And they run on completely different hardware. Fear comes with a surge of autonomic arousal, the fight or flight package, thoughts of imminent danger, and the urge to escape. Anxiety, for example, comes with muscle tension and hypervigilance. Your body isn't running. It's bracing itself. It's preparing for something that hasn't happened yet. So hold on to all of this information because in a few minutes, I'm going to show you the actual structure in your brain. Ordinary worry is about something. It's proportionate, and this is the part of the DSM that is very precise. Worry means you can eventually come back to a state of balance. Everyday worries are experienced as more manageable, and they can be put off when something more pressing comes up. So it doesn't take over the mind. The worry and generalized anxiety disorder is different in 4 specific ways. It's more excessive, it's more persistent, it lasts longer, and it can show up without a trigger. So nothing has happened, but all of a sudden it just arrived. And this is what interferes with your ability to pay attention and to do the thing that's actually in front of you. So this is what decreases your functionality. This is what stops you from going to work, going to school, and doing the things that you love to do. So here is a tell that clinicians tend to use. The greater the range of life circumstances a person worries about, the more likely they are to meet the criteria for generalized anxiety disorder. So it isn't just one thing, it's the job, it's your mother's health, it's the noise in the car. Notice what's in that list. In addition, notice that according to the DSM, a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder means that symptoms are present for at least 6 months, more days than not. And it's difficult to control. And then there are 3 physical symptoms for adults and 1 for children. This is not a thinking problem. It is a mind-body problem. Also notice what's not there. Panic attacks, racing hearts, that's the next myth. Generalized anxiety disorder and panic disorder are completely different disorders. So if you want more information about panic disorder, please leave a comment down below. Here's a detail that surprises even clinicians. The symptoms of hyperarousal, the accelerated heart rate, the shortness of breath, the dizziness are actually less prominent in generalized anxiety disorders than in other disorders like panic disorder. Generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, has to do with the addition of the physical, like muscle tension. And with this can come trembling, twitching, feeling shaky, aches and soreness your massage therapist keeps commenting on, sweating, nausea, stomach trouble, and exaggerated startle responses, such as you jump when the toaster pops, and some conditions that run along with it, such as irritable bowel and headaches. The research does not agree that this is minor. Generalized anxiety disorder is associated with significant disability and distress that is independent of whatever else you got going on, meaning it disables people all on its own, and not just when it's stacked on depression, for example, or other stressors. It accounts for around 110 million disability days a year in the United States, and it's linked to decreased work performance, higher medical resource use, and increases the risk of coronary problems, such as hypertension or heart issues. And I also have to tell you something that gets left out of every video that at least I've seen about anxiety, which includes generalized anxiety disorder is linked with increased suicidal thoughts and behaviors. And that stays true even after you account for other diagnoses and stressful life circumstances. In psychological autopsy studies, it's the anxiety disorder most frequently found in people who have died by suicide. So as an example, if you're someone who is diagnosed with depression and anxiety, you might be struggling with the loneliness, but also the fear and the worry of what the future holds also increases impulsivity, especially in adolescence, which is a very risky time for individuals. These are people who are really struggling and at risk of dying by suicide. Worldwide, it's around 1.3% and a wide range across countries, from 0.2% to 4.3%. Lifetime risk in the US is about 9%. So women and adolescent girls are at least twice as likely as men and boys to experience it. And here's the developmental factor that reframes the whole thing. Generalized anxiety disorder starts later than the other anxiety disorders. It rarely shows up before adolescence, but the anxious temperament, that's early. Many people with this diagnosis say they have felt anxious and nervous all of their lives. So even though majority of symptoms are usually reported later on in life, that doesn't mean that people who are younger than 10 years old don't experience symptoms of anxiety. It's chronic, it fluctuates between the full disorder and a quieter version of itself for years. And I'll be honest with you, rates of full remission are unfortunately low. The content also changes with age, but the machine doesn't. So kids with worry about their performance at school and in sports, even when nobody is evaluating them, about being on time, about catastrophes like earthquakes, they're often the overly comforting, perfectionistic ones who redo their work and need excessive reassurance. Only adults typically worry about health, finances, and about failing overall. Same engine, different fuel. There's a real cultural variation in how this presents as well. So for some cultures, it manifests as somatic symptoms. In others, cognitive symptoms lead. In the United States, a higher prevalence is associated with exposure to racism and ethnic discrimination. Everything I just gave you is a framework, not a self-diagnosis. Recognizing yourself in this list is not a diagnosis. Only a licensed clinician can diagnose this because they have to rule out everything else. And the list that impersonates generalized anxiety disorder is long, such as thyroid problems and especially hyperthyroidism, certain rare tumors, and you probably didn't know this, caffeine. Yes, there's actually a diagnosis called caffeine-induced anxiety disorder. Stimulants also mimic symptoms, alcohol withdrawal, certain medications that you're taking. That's why a proper workup includes blood work and a diagnostic interview. It's not just a conversation, and it's not just a checklist. If this sounds like you, that is not a verdict. It is a reason to book a proper assessment, especially if it's affecting your ability to function day to day. I suggest you talking to a psychiatrist who can diagnose you properly and provide you with medication if that's what's needed. Let's take a look at the biology first, and then we'll take a look at the psychological layer that almost no video will talk about. When looking at the biological factors that contribute to generalized anxiety disorder, we will start with the genes. So about 1/3 of the risk of experiencing generalized anxiety disorder is genetic. And those genetic factors overlap with the risk of negative affectivity, and they're shared with other disorders like depression, particularly major depressive disorder. This is why anxiety and depression travel together so often. They're not just two strangers who happen to meet. They come from overlapping neurological roots. Temperamentally, a few things raise your risk. Behavioral inhibition, the shy, cautious, hangs back at the party kind of kid, negative affectivity, harm avoidance, and an attentional bias to threat. Your attention gets pulled to danger so quickly where others do not. That's not a choice. That's your biological structure. That's your default setting. Childhood adversities and specific parenting practices, including overprotection, overcontrol, and reinforcement of avoidance. These are associated with generalized anxiety disorder. And I want to be careful here because I'm not saying that your parents did this to you. I'll come back to that in more detail shortly.
Let's talk about the biology in more detail.
First is the amygdala, two little almond-shaped structures deep in your temporal lobes, and its job is threat detection. And it's super fast. It processes danger before your conscious mind even is aware. Second is the prefrontal cortex, the front of your brain behind your forehead, which is responsible for judgment, context, and impulse control. This is the part of your brain that is responsible for higher order reasoning. The research suggests that anxiety is a bottom-up process, a sensory process, an alarm from the amygdala. The top-down control from the prefrontal cortex aids in helping you understanding what's going on. The alarm isn't necessarily louder. The brakes are in fact weaker, meaning that there lies fault in the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for relaxing the body. Now here's the piece almost nobody explains. Sitting next to the amygdala is something called the B, part of what researchers call the extended amygdala. The amygdala handles fear, short, sharp, and cued. The thing is here right now, and then it's gone. The BNSC handles sustained responses to that threat that is uncertain, unpredictable, and not here yet. The distinction I open with this video, fear is about now. Anxiety is about next. It isn't a clever line that I just made up. It appears to be wired into two different structures in your brain. This is why saying to yourself, but nothing bad even happened, doesn't actually help you. Nothing bad happening is not evidence to the system. Uncertainty is the trigger. That's the food it craves. So the alarm fires. What is it called? Hypothalamus. A small structure that runs the inference between your brain and your body. And it sends the message down the road at 2 speeds. So these 2 speeds are housed in the autonomic nervous system. And the fastest road is the sympathetic nervous system. Straight down the adrenal glands, which release adrenaline and noradrenaline. Heart rate increases, breathing becomes shallow and fast, pupils dilate, blood leaves your gut and your fingers and goes to the bigger muscles. Digestion slows down, and this takes seconds. That's the road that gets you out of harm's way. This is what enables movement. This is the fight or flight. You can't flee and you can't fight if you don't have any energy. Number 2 is the slow road, which is the road that matters for you. It's related to the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which tells the pituitary to release
adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH,
which tells the adrenal cortex to release cortisol, the stress hormone. That takes minutes to hours, and the cortisol's job is to keep the body mobilized, and then, normally, to feed back and switch the whole system off. This is where the brakes are supposed to come in. Now let's go back and look at those 6 physical symptoms that we listed in the criteria for generalized anxiety disorder, because now they stop being a random list. It's starting to come together and make sense. Muscle tension? Your body has been ready to fight or run for at least 6 months, and nobody told you to stand down. Fatigue? You've been idling the engine at 4,000 RPM in a parking lot. So of course you're exhausted. You've been running a marathon sitting still. Sleep disturbances? Arousal is the opposite of sleep. Your attention has been rewired for threat monitoring. Irritability? The system is already primed, so it takes almost nothing to trip it. Restlessness, keyed up, or feeling on edge. This is literally what an activated stress axis feels like from the inside. Now, let's talk about the chemistry. And let me bury another myth for you. Your brain runs on a balance between two main systems. Glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter. This is the accelerator. GABA, otherwise known as gamma aminobutyric acid. This is the brake system. GABA's entire job is to tell the neurons to slow down. Inhibitory control, not adequately regulating the excitatory alarm. Too much acceleration with a faulty brake system. And this explains something people find mysterious. Benzodiazepines, which are medication to help the internalized braking system, such as lorazepam, clonazepam, and diazepam, bind to a site on the GABA-A receptor and amplify GABA's effects. They don't add calm, they press harder on the brakes you already have. That's why they work in 20 minutes or so. It's also why they carry risk. You're borrowing brake pressure and the system adapts. This is where tolerance, dependency, withdrawal, sedation, and memory effects come into play. This is why the guidelines generally reserve them for a short period of time, not for long-term use. And alcohol works on the same system, which is exactly why alcohol is the most common form of self-medication when it comes to anxiety. And one of the worst, because you get the break tonight, but you pay it back with interest at 4 a.m. when your nervous system rebounds, and all of a sudden you're wondering why you're feeling so overwhelmed. Serotonin and norepinephrine modulate the whole circuit. And that's why SSRIs and SNRIs are usually the first medication a prescriber reaches for. And keep in mind, it takes weeks, not minutes, for this medication to kick in. They're not sedating you. They're slowly retuning the system, which is a completely different job, and it's a different timeline. If you expect a benzodiazepine and you get an SSRI, you'll think it failed on day 3, but it didn't. You're only on day 3. And remember to always talk to your prescriber and your pharmacist about the side effects and interactions of your medication. Pharmacists are incredible and an underused resource, so definitely use them to get more informed information. So those are the basic foundations of the illness. But for many people, and many, not all, and I'm going to hold that line carefully, there's a psychological layer underneath. And this is where everyone gets confused. So here's another perspective, and it doesn't come from me. It comes from the Psychodynamic Diagnostic Manual, the 2nd edition. And it is a genuinely radical sentence. Many people currently diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, as defined by the DSM, are perhaps better understood as having a personality style in which anxiety is the psychological organizing experience. So hear me out. Not a person who has anxiety, a person built around it. Here are the traits. Phobic and avoidant people can be shy and reserved. You tend to feel inferior and inadequate, indecisive, and inhibited. And here's a subtle sign. You often have a real difficult time recognizing and describing what you actually feel. Cognitive researchers describe the identical thing, difficulty identifying anxiety-charged thoughts, connecting them to what triggered them, and getting any distance from them. Now, the distinction that changes everything. Other personality structures keep the fear out of consciousness. The obsessional person intellectualizes it. The hysterical person converts it. The manic person, and if you watch my bipolar video, you'll recognize this, outs it. Their defenses work. They don't know that they're afraid. So this keeps the original pain points, the trauma or psychic traumas, buried under the defense. So all of this sounds like bad news, but it actually isn't. It means the material is already there. Nothing has to be excavated. You already know that you're afraid. That's a head start most people don't have. Identification is key. If you can't identify the problem, then you can't fix it. Phobic and avoidant people attach to the anxiety, like a specific object or situation, the bridge, the elevator, the dinner party, and then rearrange their lives to stay away from the thing that they're afraid of. But other anxious people experience something different, some of which a free-floating, global sense of anxiety with no idea what is actually frightening them. So 2 different stances, 2 different perspectives. So if it's free floating, if you don't know what you're afraid of, does that mean there's an answer? Yes, there is. And this is the one part I find genuinely beautiful. Long clinical experience has identified a handful of anxieties that appear to be universal among human beings. For example, one is separation anxiety, the fear of losing an attachment object, losing the person that you need. So more usefully, the fear of damage to the body. This is your health anxiety. So you're 2 a.m. Googling, trying to figure out if you have just a headache or you're having a stroke. The dread of violating your own core values, fear of punishment, and fear of becoming someone you couldn't live with. 4, existential anxiety. And this is the deepest one. Either a terror of fragmentation and the consequent loss of your own sense of self. Kohut called it disintegration anxiety, or a terror of destruction based on something that already happened to you. There's a mechanism, and Nancy McWilliams describes it better than anyone. This is the defense of displacement, redirecting a feeling off its original object onto a different one, because the original direction is for some reason too anxiety-ridden to go near. So you bury it, you keep it stuck in the unconscious. You already know this one, and you've already seen a similar cycle. The man gets humiliated by his boss, comes home and yells at his wife, who then scolds the kids, then the kids kick the dog. Nobody in that chain is angry at who they're actually angry at. It becomes a domino effect, all because of displacement. And Nancy McWilliams is explicit about where this goes. With someone who displaces anxiety onto a specific object that symbolizes the dreaded thing, that person has, for lack of a better term, a phobia. And when people carry patterns of displacement, fearful preoccupation across many aspects of their lives, we consider the character to be phobic. So here's my question. If a phobia is displaced anxiety that landed on an object, then what's worry? Now watch this, it gets interesting, because you'd expect the behavioral researchers, the CBT people, the ones who traditionally have very little time for psychoanalysis, to disagree. But they don't. They found the same thing from the other direction. With stopwatches and heart rate monitors, worry happens in words. And here's the finding that matters. Thinking about a threat in words blunts your body's emotional response to it. Worry suppresses the physiological reaction. It ultimately flattens the feeling, which means your worry works perfectly as a defense. That's why you can't stop. Every time you worry, you get a small immediate reward. The feeling gets quieter, so the behavior gets reinforced every single time for as long as you can remember. So where does this anxious structure come from? The PDM is specific, and it's not what you might expect. If you're an individual struggling with an anxious personality structure, often you may report having a primary caregiver who, because of their own anxiety, they could not adequately comfort you. They could not convey a sense of security to you, or maybe could not support in a sense of agency and establishing a sense of independence. I will say it again, it's because of the caregiver's own anxiety. For those of you who did not grow up in an abusive household, facing cruelty, neglect, and or malice, it is the primary caregiver's own anxiety that conditioned you. And the attachment researchers note that most people with characterological anxiety would probably have been identifiable in early childhood as having an anxious attachment. Think about what that child has learned over time. If comfort is unreliable, if sometimes it comes and sometimes it doesn't, of course you can't relax. So you do the thing available. You watch, you observe, you learn, and you read the room. You get very good at noticing patterns and predicting what might come. And here's the finding I want you to actually hear, because it comes out of the attachment research, not out of optimism. Despite how continuous attachment style is across a lifespan, insecure attachment styles may slowly change toward more secure attachment in the context of a long, devoted relationship. And they name intensive psychotherapy as one of those foundational relationships. Majority of therapists, unfortunately, don't have the psychoanalytic training needed to identify unconscious defenses that maintain the psychological trauma buried within. The trauma, the pain that keeps you stuck, the anxious personality structure is psychologically organized around defenses against your own fear. These are walls you've built up to contain your fear. You disown it, and then you project it. And you may even seek out dangerous situations unintentionally. You might thrive on these risks. And that is very problematic. Most of you rarely come to therapy, partly because asking for help is a vulnerable act. And vulnerable acts are exactly what you're trying to avoid. Some of you rely heavily on medication or self-medicate with alcohol or drugs. When you do decide to come to therapy, it's typically after a trauma or a very stressful situation, or because a loved one urged you to. And here's what is amazing about the psychoanalytic psychotherapist. We invoke an anxious countertransference. This means we sit with you and we feel afraid. We sense it with you. The fear doesn't just disappear. It got handed to somebody else in the room. This happens through transference within the session. The psychoanalytic therapist, like myself, will sit down with a patient and help the patient speak about their experiences, their bodily influences, what is happening to them in the moment, what has happened to them before. This is the insight building part that helps people like you move from feeling stuck to feeling free. And if what I just described, the vigilance, the not knowing what you're afraid of, the parent that couldn't hand you safety, if that's hitting a little too close to home, I have something for you, and it is completely free. My mini course, Unmasking Your Depression, lives inside the Mind People community, and it's completely free. We will soon be adding an anxiety-specific course that will give you some practical tools to help you regain a sense of balance, build insight into your unconscious fear, and start to process the pain that you've been avoiding. These are psychoeducational based courses, and it is not a replacement for therapy, and it is not regarded as therapy. I know I just highlighted the depression mini course, even though we're talking about anxiety. That's not by accident. Remember, the genetics, the risk factors for anxiety and depression overlap and are shared. They are two dialects of the same story. The course walks you through the guilt, the emptiness, and the inner critic speaking in your own voice and how to start working with it. So grab it after this video. And remember, it lives in the free The Mind People community. The link is below. Go check it out. And if you resonated with the defense of outrunning the feeling, and that's more your speed, I broke down the manic side of the exact same coin in another video. I'll link it down in the description below, so then this way you can take a look. There's one more layer that is important to discuss. Some of your anxiety is not a distortion. It's an accurate perception that you've been asked to stop having. You're not safe. Nobody is. We are mortal. We are ultimately alone inside our own existence. Nobody hands us a guarantee, and nobody hands us a ready-made purpose. That's the unfortunate reality. And worry is the mind's attempt to solve by thinking a problem that cannot be solved by thinking. The mind is trying to think its way into certainty, and that's why it never finishes. There's no answer at the bottom of it. Not because you're not thinking hard enough or thinking in the correct way or accurate way, but because certainty was never on the menu. Stress, sleep loss, caffeine, alcohol, big life transitions, a phone that hands you a global catastrophe every 4 seconds. These don't cause generalized anxiety disorder. They're triggers. They light the match in someone who already has the wiring. And childhood adversity raises the risk and can worsen the course. Remember the thesis? Turn the alarm down, then go looking for what the worry was protecting you from. If you watched my bipolar video, you heard me say that medication is the foundation. Full stop. Stabilize the biology first and then do the deeper work. That is true for bipolar disorder, but that might not be necessarily true here. For generalized anxiety disorder, psychotherapy and medication show roughly equivalent efficacy. Therapy alone is a legitimate first-line treatment. Medication alone is a legitimate first-line treatment. And the Canadian guidelines are explicit that current evidence does not support routinely combining them as your opening move. You generally start with one, and if it doesn't take you far enough, then you add the other. Which one you start with depends on your preference, your severity, what you can access, what you've already tried, what else is going on. That's a conversation with a professional. Again, it's not a rule and it's not a checklist. Now let's talk about the standard treatment, psychoeducation. Everything in the last 20 minutes, understanding your alarm, your triggers, your early signs. You cannot work with a system you don't understand. This is where expanding your knowledge base is key. CBT is not about thinking positively. It's dropping your safety barrier. Safety behaviors are all the little things you do to make the anxiety stop. Reassurance seeking, checking, Googling, over preparing, rereading the text, arriving 40 minutes early, asking, "Are you mad at me?" for like the third time. 3 is exposure. And in generalized anxiety disorder, exposure is a bit strange. Because what do you expose someone to when the feared thing is something bad at some point that maybe will happen? The answer? You expose them to the outcome in imagination. So for instance, a therapist will help their patient go all the way to the end of their thoughts, the feared thoughts they've been circling for years and never actually once finished. Number 4 is mindfulness-based approaches. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy has evidence behind it, and the move here isn't relaxation. It's willingness, having the feeling instead of negotiating with it. 5, arousal management, applied relaxation, breathing control, and I want to be honest about what this is and what this isn't. This is not a cure. It's the fire extinguisher. But you cannot think your way out of a sympathetic surge, because the thinking part is the first thing to go offline. Remember the prefrontal cortex we spoke about? So you have to go at this through the body. The medication side, I kept it general because I am not a prescriber and this is not medical advice. SSRIs and SNRIs are usually preferred as initial treatments. They're generally safer and better tolerated than the older options. Benzodiazepines work fast and have a real short-term role at a crisis point or while you wait for an antidepressant to actually take effect, but they're generally restricted to short-term use because of its dependency features, sedation, and cognitive effects. One more honest number, because nobody tells you this and it makes people quit. Remember, medication for anxiety typically takes 2 to 8 weeks to start helping, and full response can take up to 12 weeks or more. So the guidelines suggest continuing for 12 to 24 months for most people. So if you stopped at week 3 and concluded that your SSRIs or SNRIs did not work and you're not treatable, you were only on week 3. So make sure you give your medication some time to work. Now let's dive a bit deeper, because this is the reason why you're here. For a lot of you, CBT alone can work. It has the strongest evidence base for the disorder, and if you do it properly, you can actually see some great results. That is a good outcome. So take it, go live your life by it. Amazing. You don't owe anybody a deeper journey, but some of you have done everything right. You learned the skills, you did the thought records, you got better, and then the anxiety came back, but wearing a different costume. It moved from your health to your kids, from your kids to your job, from your job to your marriage. The PDM makes a strong claim about this, that these characterological anxieties have a developmental trajectory, that they impede treatment progress, and that they require a deeper form of therapy than the traditional exposure therapies often cited as empirically supported. And the PDM itself says exposure and response prevention treatment, as well as education in mindfulness and meditative disciplines, may be useful adjuncts, not enemies, adjuncts. The question is, what do you as a person actually need? The psychoanalytic approach has many benefits. It makes the free-floating specific. That's the whole game. We take the thought, "I'm just anxious about everything," and find out which of the 4 it actually is. Am I afraid of being left? Of my body failing? Of becoming someone I can't live with? Of coming apart entirely? When an anxious patient makes sweeping proclamations of danger, the therapist presses for details. And then what would happen? And then what? And then what? Until we reach the actual fantasy they have never once let themselves finish. This is the vital component of therapy. This is what it means to dive deep and peel back the therapeutic layers. It builds the security that didn't get built in the first time. The relationship itself, the therapeutic relationship, is part of the intervention. Someone reliable who doesn't flinch, who stays while you're frightening yourself, who does not get destabilized by your feelings. That is how insecure attachment slowly moves towards secure. Not just through insight, not just through thinking about your thoughts, also through repetition in a relationship that keeps showing up. For the small group of therapists who are trained to do this, this clinical technique is vital for patient progress. It restores agency. So the work isn't just feeling calmer, it's becoming a person who does things instead of a person where things happen to you. It answers the existential question instead of burying it in worry. With voices like Viktor Frankl, who found this inside a concentration camp, you learn that you can't always choose what happens to you, but you can choose your stance towards it. Meaning isn't something you wait to receive. It's something you build one genuine moment at a time. Because generalized anxiety disorder carries real measurable suicide risk, I need to say this directly. If you're in that place right now, or someone you love is, please do not carry it alone. Reaching out is not weakness. It is the bravest thing that you can do and the greatest thing that you can give to yourself. Here's what I need you to hear. Anxiety disorders are among the most treatable conditions. We have multiple treatments that work. We have two entirely different traditions that arrived at the same answer from opposite directions, and that is rare in this field. And it should tell you something. People with this diagnosis build careers, marriages, families, and very meaningful lives. Not by defeating the anxiety, but by demoting it. Feeling it, but not letting it take over. Not letting it impede on your functionality and your overall sense of personal and existential growth. None of these patterns are who you are genuinely. They're who you learn to be, a conditioned response, built in childhood where safety wasn't readily available and watching was the smartest thing that you could possibly do for yourself at the time. And anything that was learned can be examined, questioned, and slowly unlearned. Nothing is written in stone. So here's what you can start doing right now. These are educational and practical tools. Remember, this is not therapy and not a replacement for therapy. I'm just providing additional information and you can see what is helpful for you and what is not helpful for you. Expanding your knowledge base is why I'm here. Tip number 1 is run a worry log for 2 weeks. The left column include worries that are actual problems with an actual next step. Right is the what ifs with no step available. Do the left column. Practice letting the right column simply exist without solving it. Then add a third column and write if it actually happened. Tip number 2, build a worry window. So take time, 15 minutes, let's say you're scheduling this out, same time every day, sitting in a chair, never in your bed. We don't want that association. When a worry shows up outside of your window of tolerance, your ability to tolerate the stress, then write it down and speak to it in detail. You're not suppressing it. So this helps because it breaks the link between worry and every single place you live. It helps you put the words to feelings and explore your fearful fantasies in depth. Either write this down or dictate it. Don't just think it in your mind. That's how you can spiral and then begin to feel very overwhelmed. So remember, we are naming it. This is part of the identification process. Free from judgment, free from solutions, just exploring parts of the mind that got buried. Tip number 3, don't forget the body. Example, during your deep breathing exercises, make the exhale longer than the inhale. So in for 4, out for 6 or 8. Do this for 5 minutes because reasoning is the first thing to go offline. You have to speak to the body in the body's language. Deep diaphragmatic breathing and progressive muscle relaxation can help in the moment. I'll link the video below where I talk about some of these strategies in a little bit more detail. Name your safety behaviors and try to drop exactly one. The reassurance text, the third Google, the over-preparing, just pick one. Don't do it. Watch the anxiety spike and then watch it come down anyway without you fixing it. That moment is the entire lesson. Your nervous system needs to learn it in the body. It cannot learn it solely from information gathering alone. Tip number 5, guard your inputs. Caffeine and alcohol both act directly on the system we talked about. Protect your sleep, protect your body chemistry. This is a lifestyle tip. You're managing an arousal system on purpose. Number 6, the and then what ladder. Take one worry, write it down at the top of the page, and ask yourself, and then what would happen? Answer it, remember out loud or dictate it in your phone, then ask again and again and again. You might do this 7 or 8 times. Don't stop at reasonable. Go all the way to the bottom, maybe even multiple pages. It's usually, and this is more often than not, I'll be alone. I'll be exposed as bad. I'll come apart. That's the fear, right? That's the actual fear. Everything above it was a costume. Layers upon layers to get to the actual core of the trauma, of the pain. Number 7, the reflection. In a journal, finish the sentence honestly. if I stopped worrying about this, what would happen? Freely articulate what fluidly comes to your mind. Don't force it, don't solve it. Just be gentle with yourself. Sit with your thoughts and see what comes up. Naming is where healing begins. Remember how we spoke about identification? You need to identify the problem before you learn to solve it or fix it in its own way. The affirmations, because this is an important part. And I'm doing these differently than you've seen anywhere else, and I want to tell you exactly why. If I had you repeat, I'm safe, everything will be fine, I'd be handing you a reassurance ritual. And you just learned what reassurance does to anxiety. It feeds it. So that's not going to be an affirmation we're going to do here. These are different. They're not promises that you're safe. They're statements that you can handle not knowing. Say them with me and save this for a very difficult day. This is anxiety. I can understand the feeling behind anxiety. It's not fixed information. I can feel this and not fix it. The worry never kept me safe. It just kept me busy. Discomfort is not danger. I don't need certainty to take the next step. I'm allowed to know and go anyway. My body learned this. My body can learn something else. I can live life on life's terms. Even if everything else was a blur, remember this. If you are diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, you are not dramatic, you are not too much, you are not weak, and you did not do this to yourself. You have a real treatable illness. And underneath all of the watching, there is a self that is so worth getting to know. And if anxiety was only ever a word you use casually, now you know what it costs the people who actually have it. Maybe you'll use it differently. Maybe you'll spot it in someone you love. The one who thinks of everything, who never quite relaxes, who you've always described as just intense. Maybe you can spot it in time to help. Remember, generalized anxiety disorder is not a personality flaw. And it's not about worrying too much. It's a real treatable illness. And the worry is not the problem. The worry is part of the solution. It is what you do so you don't have to feel what is underneath. It's your defense. You turn the alarm down with the right care, therapy, medication, or both. And then in the deeper work, you go looking for what the worry has been protecting you from, what the defense is actually against. That is how you stop managing your anxiety and start living without needing it. So hope is definitely not lost. That's the whole map. It's not hard to conceptualize, but it is hard to walk the path. And the first step is just an honest look at what's really going on. If you really want help with your anxiety, then the only way out is in. If any of this landed, here's your next move. And notice I'm going to say this slowly and respectfully because I don't want you to do something just out of anxiety. If you think generalized anxiety might be part of your story, a good first call is to your family doctor or preferably a psychiatrist, because some of the things that impersonate anxiety, generalized anxiety, could be another medical condition. And it's important to rule out anything before making a firm diagnosis. This is why going to a psychiatrist, in my professional opinion, is best because they are medically trained to do this. If you don't have access to a psychiatrist, then your general practitioner is the next best option. If you're ready to actually understand what your worry has been doing for you, that's where my team comes in. We provide therapy to help you find out what the anxiety is really about, drop the safety behaviors, and build a life you're living instead of monitoring. If you reside in Ontario, then you can book a 30-minute complimentary consultation with our consultation care coordinator. No pressure, no commitment, just a conversation to see if we're the right fit for you. So remember, whether you're thinking of going to therapy or you're going to see a psychiatrist, the choice is up to you. So sit with the decision, think about it, and reflect on what is the best path for you. If this gave you language for something you couldn't name, save it for later, click the like button, and send it to someone who needs it. Leave a comment describing what your worry is. What do you think you're actually afraid of? I'll do my best to read and respond to all comments. And don't forget to follow for more honest mental health insights that majority of professionals won't tell you or can't tell you.